on the one hand, you have Russians just joining this cause to really eye-popping numbers that you put out there, and it speaks to how much, I know you've spoken on other programs in the past about why Russia and Russians in particular are so passionate about this particular cause. But then you also have Ukrainians. On the one hand, the manpower issue is a product of war. It's a product of Russia being very successful in war. And you also have now seemingly many more reports of Ukrainians, because of how bad it is, fleeing. But you also have, as you said, Ukrainians also very committed to their side of this cause. Could you explain why, first, maybe on the Russian side? We've talked a lot about Ukraine and why Ukraine is fighting this conflict. But on the Russian side, like, why is this so critical? Why have Russians, I know you've been to Russia several times, why have Russians really stepped up for this cause to the point where it's almost absolutely essential that you're part of it in some form?
Yeah. I mean, it's a great question, but in order to give an answer, I got to forgive me, because I'm going to give you an expansive answer, because it's the only way I can answer the question properly. Russia, you have to go back to the 1990s to understand how to answer this question. In the decade of the 90s, and the chaos and the catastrophe that took place, millions of Russians dying, the economic catastrophe, the political catastrophe, every aspect of Russian society was in a state of decay and collapse. This is the Russia that Vladimir Putin inherited. It was a thoroughly diseased Russia. And it was one that was a political minefield. I mean, people need to go back and read about the last months of the Yeltsin regime and how the wolves were circling with the knives to carve it all up when Yeltsin went away. He had all the people that thought they were going to be the heir apparent. And that's why he reached out and he grabbed Putin and brought him in, because Yeltsin knew at the end, he apologized. In his farewell address, I made many mistakes, he said. And he recognized that. And one of the mistakes he made was to entrust too much to his wife and to his daughter and his daughter's husband. And they had assembled this pack of wolves that are getting ready to continue to devour people who enriched themselves from the collapse and demise of Russia. So he brought in Putin and he put Putin in charge. Everybody today is like, Putin's this all-powerful leader and all that stuff. Hey, you can say what you want. He was in a precarious situation, and he had to make compromises. He had to make decisions about what his priorities were to right this sinking ship, which means he had to tolerate a lot of stuff. And what he had to tolerate was the corruption of the oligarchs. Now, he told the oligarchs early on, do not get involved in politics. I need you guys to keep doing your economic thing. I'm going to tell you right now that your economic thing, while you get rich, needs to also start having money come back into Russia and bringing the life, the quality of life up for Russians. But if you get involved in politics, and Khodorkovsky, the head of Gazprom, I guess, or Lukoil, I think it was, he said, screw you, Putin, who the hell are you coming in here at the last second to take over what I was supposed to be running? And he jumped into politics. Putin took him down, arrested him, put him in jail, ended up getting exiled. He's one of the leaders of the opposition right now, and operating out of London. But you have this oligarch problem. You have also the problem of the integration of the West. The West had come in during the 90s. Companies had been installed. They'd become insinuated with the Russian social and economic and political fabric. So you had about 30 to 40% of Russia entwined with the West, and you couldn't do anything to clean that up. Because remember, it's a democracy. Putin has to run for elections, and he needs to win them. And he was, it's not Saddam Hussein dictatorship where you get, 99.99%, or Kim Jong-un gets 100% because he's Kim Jong-un. No, Putin had to run against people who were gunning for his job, against a very large opposition, well funded by the West. So he's getting 54, 56, 58%, which is a nice margin. But if he alienates what was a politically neutral, pro-Western element who said, as long as you allow the economy to function so that we can put money in our pocket, money in the bank, and we can live okay, we'll keep supporting you for, in office. Well, he also understood that this system right here was inefficient. It fed the corruption of the oligarchs and all that, but he couldn't touch it compromises had to be made. Also, in Yeltsin, the time of the governors under Yeltsin, they all became corrupt. The entire system was corrupt. Putin couldn't come in and shock the whole system at once. He had to basically make compromises to allow certain practices to continue while he started cleaning up office. And while he's cleaning up office, he has to solve a war in Chechnya, sit down with Ahmed Kadyrov and bring an end to that conflict to resolve the Chechen situation. While he's doing that, he has other situations coming up. The United States trying to use Navalny to create a color revolution in the streets. He has to leave and turn power over to Medvedev while the United States seeks to use Medvedev to keep Putin out of office, tearing down democracy. So instead of being able to be totally focused on the rebuilding of Russia, he continually has to make his priorities about the survival of Russia, which requires compromises to be made about corruption, about certain political practices, certain things that otherwise wouldn't be tolerated, but have to be tolerated. And so this is the situation of Russia. It's moving in the right direction. Putin is doing a great job of reviving it, but it's still fundamentally, it's still got a disease. It's like having a cancer still inside you, but you've suppressed the symptoms. It looks like you're healthy, but it's still there. It hasn't gone into remission, and it's going to come back if you don't deal with it, but you can't deal with it because you got to solve all these other issues out there. And that's the situation that existed in Russia at the time of the initiation of the special military operation. Putin was very worried, according to press reports. There was these sanctions. They had no idea how these sanctions were going to impact. He was being told by his top experts that the Western sanctions were going to cause a contraction in the economy of 25-30%. That's very hard. And now you have people saying you don't have enough manpower, especially after the Ukrainians counterattack. But how do you mobilize? If you mobilize at a time when the economy was going into a shock, you could get even a greater shock. And now that shock creates people who have no jobs, who are looking at the collapse of the economy. That Western elite that was ingrained with the West will rebel. Putin's in a very precarious situation. But then things happened. The economy didn't shrink. The economy, it shrunk, but a small percentage, and it looked like it was going to grow. That gave him great latitude now to say, with a healthy economy, I can do things. The West sanctioned the oligarchs. That was the end of the oligarch class. Solved one of Putin's forever problems. He doesn't have to worry about the oligarchs anymore. The West sanctioned them, and overnight, the oligarchs became a political nullity. Putin said, get the hell out of the country. We don't need you anymore. And those that stay because of sanctions, you can't take your wealth out. And now Putin gets to solve another problem, how to get that money reinvested back into Russia. Laws are passed, the money's reinvested. And when it gets reinvested, Putin takes control of that. And now the corruption's real. And suddenly you've got this great thing. Then the West, by the sanctions, they divorce with Russia economically. And that whole group that was entwined there that Putin had to worry about, doesn't have to worry about them anymore because the divorce has happened, but it's not Putin's fault. It's the West's fault. And these people start going, who's to blame? The West is to blame. And literally overnight, what happened is the Russians woke up to the reality that the West was trying to kill them, that the West wanted to destroy Russia. And they rediscovered patriotism. Now, the Russians have always been patriotic, but they've been sort of confused patriots because the Russians, especially after the 1990s, looked to the West as sort of, the big Western brother, etc. But now Russians are going, well, no, the West, and they're looking in the mirror going, I'm not as ugly as I thought I was. I'm doing all right. I go to the gym a little bit. I can fix this. I can fix this. And then they go to the gym and they're going, I look pretty damn good. I can compete. They're working, they're getting money, their economy's doing well, and the Russians become proud of being Russian again. And that's what's happening here. You have people now that are proud to be Russian. They are proud to say, I am Russian. And there's a surge of patriotism, and it is real as it gets. And this results in two things. One, the Russians now saying that this war in Ukraine is their equivalent to the Great Patriotic War. This is an existential fight for the survival of Russia. And the Russians have rediscovered patriotism, and they are saying we are committed to victory here. We are not going to be defeated here. We are 100% behind this presidency. Then you had an election that took place last month. And the interesting thing about this election is everybody knew that Putin was going to win, but the goal was to have Russians be so upset about the war, about the economy, that they wouldn't show up in numbers. And the people did show up. Putin would win by a not so impressive margin. But Putin took the case of Russian patriotism to the Russian people, and he said, "This election isn't about me; it's about you. It's about us. It's about the Russian nation." And they responded. 77% of the Russian people went to the polls, and 88% of those who went to the polls voted for Vladimir Putin. And now on May 7th, you're going to see something that's amazing: the inauguration. After that inauguration, Putin's going to complete the task of cleaning Russia up. All of those little residual corruptions, those little inefficiencies that he had to make compromises about to sustain because he couldn't take the political risk to go after them, he's going to go after them because the Russian people are behind him. And here's the lesson. In a time of war, when the Russian people are being asked to make so much sacrifice, in America, we talk about the military industrial complex, but do we really elevate them? I mean, we talk about it sort of critically. Do we elevate them to the same status as the soldiers on the front line? No. In Russia, in the city of Magnitogorsk, there's a monument called the Home Front, and it's about World War II. But there's a Red Army soldier and a Russian worker, and they're holding aloft a sword that's made from the steel that's produced at the factory from the iron ore in Magnitogorsk. And that sword is being presented from the worker to the Red Army soldier. The Red Army soldier takes that sword and gives it to Mother Russia, and at Volgograd, the motherland beckons. She is calling Russia forward, holding that sword aloft. That sword is in the hands of the Russian soldier in the Berlin Monument on the ground while he holds a child in his arm. The war is over, and that sword is at the United Nations being turned into a plow. The Russian people identify with everything I just said. They understand the continuity there. So when you talk to the Russian people, it's not just about the troops at the front line. It's about the nation supporting this conflict. This is a national call to war. Corruption is not tolerated right now. This is where Putin can take advantage of this, because right now there is a zero level of corruption tolerance in Russia today because of the war, because of the sacrifice that everybody's being asked to make for the war, for this existential struggle. And starting on May 7th, Putin is going to clean house. It's going to be a completely different Russia. It's a Russia that's positioning itself for the post-Putin era. And it couldn't have happened. This is the irony of it, Danny. None of this could have happened if it weren't for the stupidity of the West. If the West wanted to destroy Russia, really, I mean, they never asked me, and I wouldn't have advised this because I believe in being friends with Russia. But somebody came up to me and said, "Scott, the United States isn't going to be friends with Russia. But we need your advice. You're an American. How would you advise us to go about defeating Vladimir Putin?" And I would say, well, Vladimir Putin's already outlasted you by 25 years. So I'm here to tell you right now that the only thing that's going to defeat Vladimir Putin is Mother Nature, time. So all we have to do is run out the clock. And if we run out the clock by continuing to prohibit Putin from cleaning house, by allowing enough of the 90s infection to remain in Russia, when Putin goes away, we'll own Russia. Russia will revert back to what we wanted. There won't be another Putin to replace him, and we will control Russia. That's how I would have gone about controlling Russia, to let Russia collapse in on itself after Vladimir Putin left. Instead, what we've done is we've allowed Vladimir Putin to have the opportunity now to transition to a new Russia, one that is totally free of the infection of the 1990s, a Russia that is about the Russian state, not about one man, but about the Russian state. That's the beauty of this election that took place. It wasn't an election for Putin. It was an election for the Russian state. And he is, in the next 6 years, going to make a Russian state that can survive and thrive in a post-Putin era. And he couldn't have done it without this war.
Yeah. No, and everything you said, it just reminded me, on my trip to China, we were on the Korean border, the North Korean border, and one of the ill or forgotten parts of history is that right after China's revolution, the United States invaded Korea, and China sent a couple of million people to fight in that war. And that also, even though China, I think, lost like 200,000 people, it was pretty bloody. They succeeded, and that propelled. If China was already in a place where it was going to change dramatically, that compounding victory and the conditions that spurred it, which is the United States thinking it can just, destroy, take two birds out with one stone, Korea and China. It actually did the exact opposite. And I feel like that's exactly what is happening here. The United States believed that it could take down Russia via this hot point, this flashpoint in Ukraine, and they miscalculated gravely.
Thank you for tuning in to my latest video. I appreciate all of your support. This channel, however, needs your help. I am seeking to make this channel more sustainable in the long term and upgrade necessary equipment to ensure that this work continues onward and makes progress to give you all of the geopolitical analysis that you all deserve. For that reason, I'm asking you to become a member of my Patreon community at patreon.com/DannyDhaiphong. You can find that link in the video description or in the pinned comment below. For whatever amount you choose to give, just know you are supporting independent media that you can't find anywhere else. Thank you so much, and I look forward to the next video.